All right, I'm going to do a fun pattern here. A lot of the tutorials I do are on, flies in general that I either like tying or that are pretty popular so people can learn how to tie them. This is a little bit more of a personal creation, and if you Euro nymph, this is definitely a fly you got to have in your box. This is going to be my ADK, whoop, dropped it, my ADK Golden Stone Euro nymph. Something I kind of came up with myself. I don't claim to be the inventor of any fly, just because, as I said many times before, I believe pretty much everything's been done. So I don't know. I'm sure there's a version of this out there somewhere, but in my own mind, in my own little life here, this is something I created. I'm happy with it. It catches me a ton of fish. If you go on my Instagram account, there's a a ton of very, very large browns on there. Almost every one of them was caught on this fly. I tie them all year long. Here's a bag of several dozen that are going to be heading out to a good friend of mine. So it's a really, really productive fly, something that I really, really think you should all have in your box. In the vise is an ahrex 551, I believe. I usually use the 550s, whatever ones have no barb. This hook actually has a barb on it. Materials are getting harder to come by these days, so they were I couldn't find the ones that would no barb. The bead is a mounds firehole stone slotted bead. I think that's a 3.5 millimeter, and there is a slotted tungsten bead behind it for some extra weight. This fly definitely will get you down. There's a couple of other things I'm going to do with it to kind of improve its sink rate, but I'll talk about that when we get to that point. So I've got some 6/0 veevus for the thread, and all I'm doing is I'm slipping that thread into the slot of the bead, and I'm just building up a little bit of a dam just to kind of make that bead a little bit more secure where it's sitting. And when you can't get it to spin anymore, just butt that up to the front as much as you can. And we'll just start creating a little dam here, and that'll keep that in place. And I'm sure the comments are going to be loaded with a bunch of guys about glue. Just glue it. No, you don't need to. So that is all set. Let's get rid of the tag end. I'm going to do a bit of a triple thread base. So there's one, then I'm going to start it right back there and go back up. If you've seen my other stonefly videos, you've probably seen that I usually do a thread base because a stonefly, their tails don't quite splay out the way mayflies do. So I like my stonefly tails to sit a little bit straighter. Then we'll go back with a little dam. All right. Now for the tails, what I do not use goose biots. I think goose biots are way oversized. Instead, I use these duck quills, and these fibers here on the back, those are all your biots. So same exact thing as goose biots, but duck biots are just a little bit smaller. And for nymphs, I just think that they're way more appropriate. Duck biots are pretty much all I use. I've never really understood why so many nymphs are tied with goose biots. They're just a little too big. I've seen copper johns tied with big giant biots sticking off the back end. Like, when have you ever seen a nymph tail look like that? So I use duck, and I think that it's a much more properly sized material. So I'm just going to tie these in the back the same way you would any other biot tail. And of course, I'm just not a good enough tyer to do them at the same time. And then I'm just going to bring my thread all the way up to my bead. Let's get some of that out of there. Kind of excited to do this video. I just tie so many of these. It's nice to actually put that out there. All right, so I've got some brown D-rib, vinyl D-rib in midge size. So I'm going to tuck that up in there. Now notice where I'm starting to move down towards the back of the fly. See right about here, there's a little gap between the back of the bead and where I started making that body. That's going to be by design. You'll see why I do that in a minute. But I'm going to double back up. I'm going to create a tapered body. And a tapered body on this fly, I think, is really, really important. And the reason why is when you're Euro nymphing, you want as fast a sink rate as possible on your flies. And the reason why flies like Perdigan flies sink so fast is not because of their weight. Obviously, you look at them, they're very small flies. But the reason why they sink so fast is they have essentially zero water resistance. There's no excess dubbing or material stopping them from sinking. It's a very slick body coated in resin, and those flies just boom, go right down to the bottom right away. So if you load these flies up with dubbing, you're going to really affect the sink rate, and it's not going to be an effective Euro fly. So what you want on this underbody is you want more thread than dubbing. More thread than dubbing. So you want to build up a nice taper to that body, get the underbody all set, and when it comes time to dub, what I'm going to use is, I don't have the package here, I use it out of a dispenser, but I have Golden Stone dubbing made by Awesome Possum. So Awesome Possum brand, Golden Stone dubbing. I order them, 5, 6, 7 packets at a time. I use that dubbing all the time. And what I'm doing, that's about how much dubbing, if you can even see it on the camera, that I have in my hand every time I apply it to my noodle. And the reason why is what I just said before. You want as little dubbing as you can possibly get. This fly, when you look at the dubbed body, it's really only a fiber or two thick. And the reason why is because if you have a big, thick dubbed body, you're going to get a lot of water resistance, and the fly is just not going to sink fast enough to Euro nymph it. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take a very, very thin dubbing noodle and just apply it up the body. Let the underbody create the taper. I need a tiny little bit more dubbing. In this way, you don't have a big, thick dub body to absorb water and slow down your sink rate. If you tie this fly the right way, it will sink very quickly. And as I said, I'm getting a little too ahead of myself with this fly because I find myself just using it like 99% of the time. So we'll take our rib here. I usually get about 3 wraps on the body. Tighten that down and get that secured. Man, coffee. All right, so wing case. Wing case pretty straightforward. Just a piece of mottled turkey tail here. It's got the cinnamon tips on it. One clump of this stuff can tie you quite a few flies. I can probably get about 4 flies out of each little clump of it. So I'll pull that back a little, get all that secured. Okay. Next order of business is our legs, and we're going to go back again to our duck biots. I usually cut 6 biots off of the stem before I start tying one of these flies. So you see how the concave side, there's a convex side and a concave side. You can see how that kind of bends down. So I'm going to turn it and make sure that it splays out. Hold that in place. Straighten it out a little bit. Okay. We'll do the same thing on the other side. And once you tie a couple of these, these are not difficult flies to tie at all. I production tie these quite a bit. I mean, mostly for myself, and I give them to my buddy. I don't sell them or anything. But you can get a bunch of these tied up. They're not particularly difficult. I think the hardest thing about tying it is getting a hold of the stones, which I'm not sure what's going on with Firehole lately, but stones have been hard to come by. All right, so we're going to fill in that little area there with just a little bit more dubbing, and you're going to take the same approach. You don't need to overdo this. You don't need a ton of dubbing. That's part of the reason why when I tie these biots in, I make sure that I really build up quite a bit of thread. because I want that bulk. And the reason why you want the bulk is because I'm going to come in here and just do one layer up to the bead, and we're good. Not sure, let me fix this. There. Yeah, there was something about that focus I didn't love. All right, so the gap here in between these two beads, I want to fill that in a little bit. If you don't fill that in at all, you're going to get a little bit of unnatural splaying from your legs. So all I'm going to do is fill that in with some thread and then come right back in, and I'm going to apply another set of legs, a little bit longer. And the good thing about these is you can adjust the length of these legs once you get a good look at them. So I'm going to shorten that just a little bit. And to do that, I'm just going to take my needle nose pliers that I always have on my desk. I'm just going to pull that through, size it up, and we're all good. Get a leg over on the back side. Make sure it's even. That looks pretty good. And finish it up with some tight wraps. That's most of it. Last couple steps, pretty easy. Let's take a little bit more dubbing. Let's get that on there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover that thread with a light layer of dubbing, and then I'm going to fold my wing case over, hold it in place, and secure that with a few wraps. One behind, and you're all good to go. So we'll get a little bit of dubbing on here just to hide our whip finish, which isn't really completely necessary. I mean, the fly is good the way it is right now, but we'll get that on there. Get in here, get a whip finish in there. And I'll double that up. I like to do 2 whip finishes on this fly. Let that thread sink right down underneath that bead. Lock that in place, and you are good. So that is it. That is the ADK Golden Stone. I use this fly probably more than any other fly. As I said, I've gotten a little carried away with it. Anytime I'm bored, I don't know what to tie, I just tie up a bunch of these because I know I'm going to use them. Unbelievably productive. Most of the big browns on my Instagram that I mentioned earlier have been caught on this fly. Really, really productive. You do got to make sure that you mind the way that you tie it, because again, if you bunch up a bunch of dubbing, you know, if this body is all dubbing, you're going to lose a lot of precious sink rate, and you just can't have that with a fly like this. You can also add a little bit of resin on the wing case if you want. A lot of different things you can do with it. But either way, it's incredibly productive. It's a fly that I kind of came up with myself. It's been one of my biggest fish catchers, and really, really great fly to have. So any questions or anything, just leave them in the comments.